Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests sometimes and an open mic always. We may still not be at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, but since the pandemic, we have transitioned to this virtual space, and I am grateful this allows us to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. So thanks everyone for joining me and zooming in. Please also share in the chat to tell where you are joining me from. It's always fantastic to know where people are coming in from, and I see many new faces today, so I'm really happy that this poetry circle is growing. And happy National Poetry Month, everyone. I'm also excited to share that exactly a week back from today, I had the special honor of receiving City of Belmont's official proclamation from our mayor, designating April as the National Poetry Month. And I'm so grateful for this. And the proclamation also came through a campaign requesting all cities to do it this year, initiated by San Mateo County Poet Laureate Eileen Casaneto, our featured poet of this evening. We know that National Poetry Month in April is a special occasion to celebrate poets and poetry in our culture. And before I go on to celebrate and introduce Eileen, I would like to open by sharing this poem called The Poet by Jane Hirshfield. The Poet. She is working now in a room not unlike this one, the one where I write or you read. Her table is covered with paper. The light of the lamp would be tempered by a shade where the bulb's single harshness might dissolve, but it is not. She has taken it off. Her poems? I will never know them, though they are the ones I most need. Even the alphabet she writes in, I cannot decipher. Her chair. Let's imagine whether it is leather or canvas, vinyl or wicker. Let her have a chair. Her shadeless lamp. The table. Let one or two she loves be in the next room. Let the door be closed, the sleeping ones healthy. Let her have time and silence. Enough paper to make mistakes and go on. Thank you. Hirshfield, through this poem, brings to our attention so many things that a poet needs, while also giving us a glimpse into the poet's room. And I find it somewhat similar to my purpose with which I bring these poetry nights to you, curating the content for each of them, planning the featured segment in detail, tying it to a theme, and offering a literary conversation with my featured guest, interspersed with their reading, so as to give you all a peek into that room where the craft happens, focusing not only on the artist or the poet and their craft that is in the public eye, but also highlighting the maker themselves and all the work that goes behind in that room. So when I was thinking of this month's theme to celebrate National Poetry Month, it was the American poet Audre Lorde's words that kept echoing through. Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. And one poet who has conveyed these words and this thought time and again through her incredible work is amongst us tonight. I am thrilled to have San Mateo County Poet Laureate Aileen Casaneto as my featured poet, furthering the conversation with me on poetry and her work in this field. Let me introduce Eileen. Eileen Casaneto is an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellow and the Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, the founder of Paloma Press and author of 2 poetry collections and 3 chapbooks. Her work has appeared in Poetry, Marsh Hawk Press Review, The Bunyan Review, and Moria, among many others. Between 2019 and 2022, she helped launch youth programs and youth poetry competitions in the county. She also produced the short eco-poetry films, Breathe, an official selection in the Nature and Culture Poetry Film Festival in Copenhagen, and Decompose, forthcoming in collaboration with the Documentary Film Institute. Her community project, Speak Poetry in San Mateo County, includes a web archive featuring poets from San Mateo County, as well as work by youth on eco-poetry, identity, and social justice. She received a special congressional recognition and was appointed commissioner on the San Mateo County Commission on the Status of Women in 2021. She is featured in the Academy of American Poets National Poetry Month project, Dear Poet 2022. A very, very prolific and accomplished person. Would you all join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Eileen Casaneto? Such an honor to have you, Eileen.
Thank you so much, Monica. The honor is mine. Belmont is a beautiful city with a wonderful community made even more special for having you as Poet Laureate. Thank you so much for giving me this space to share my work. I'd like to begin with a poem that I wrote for all those who endeavored through the pandemic. This was commissioned by San Mateo County Health to honor our first responders and the loved ones of those we lost to COVID-19. We presented this in 6 locations around the county to mark the 2-year anniversary of our first shelter in place. Take heart. Take heart from a hummingbird, a handful of earth. See how memory bears fruit to carry history, healing, offspring. Listen for sounds gently rising above the hum and din, the prayers of one so far from home and kin. Say you remembered to put out feeders, withhold water from inflorescent tomcat clovers. Say you are here in lieu of flowers. What did you lose the year of our sheltering? Whom do you honor with the hope you bring? Take heart, listen. Sounds of kindness are bouncing off hard surfaces. Praise bedside care and all its auspices. Thank you. My next poem was inspired by stories of women from this county, such as Congresswoman Jackie Spear, former Half Moon Bay Mayor Naomi Imamura Patridge, and the late human rights activist Janetta Sagan. This poem was commissioned for Women's History Month last year, and now I dedicate it to every woman brave enough to tell their story and hold space for other women like you, Monica. Legacy. To tell her story, you must know when to put courage in a matchbox and conceal it in a loaf of bread. You must learn how a message betokened deliverance when courage is simply a word someone wrote on a slip of paper and the sweet scent of bread could no longer sustain you. You must grasp your other hand with what grit remains, growing and unyielding. To tell her story, you must walk in her shoes. If forced out of your leased farmland, don't forget to bring rice if you can pack only what you can carry. And if your mother did not speak inside the bus with the windows covered with brown paper on the way to the barracks, it was only because she was praying that you would not be housed in the horse stall with the manure whitewashed over. And if you were, she was deciding what to do about the smell. To tell her story, you must remember the landscape from behind barbed wire fences. You must gaze at your body and know its history. Look beneath the tender ridge scars, and see the bone protruding out of your right arm and hole the size of a football on your right thigh, wondering how the lights never went out. You must look at the image of your grandmother with the weight of rammed earth against what you survived. To tell her story, you must say a prayer, not of sorrow, but of grace. You must loosen the earth, pick daffodils to the base of the stem, remember your roots and ordinary days, and the grit under your fingernails, the way your grandmother taught you. Thank you so much.
Beautiful work there, Eileen. Such a powerful piece that is. And since you have just read that, I'd like to just quickly go over it and see. I mean, I was reading this. I was reading this article by poet and memoirist David Beispiel, and he mentioned that every society we have ever known has had poetry, and should the day come that poetry suddenly disappears in the morning, someone somewhere will reinvent it by evening. So I think that poetry has the ability to connect us to the past, the present, the future, and it is in a way a link to the passage of time. Uh, what would you say is poetry's potential? Your poem Legacy, it feels like a poem quilt of stitching together all these diverse stories of the women. So what would you say is poetry's potential?
So for me, poetry has given me the space to heal, to connect, and to look at what's possible. It taught me to be more patient with myself, that some things take time. A lot of people have, who mean well, have said that I've done such a great job in a short span, but the work that I do is really more than 20 years in the making. I've been a poet and community activist for decades now. I've established connections with various communities and cultures. I didn't know back then that the work I was doing would lead me to where I am now, and most likely what I'm doing now will lead me somewhere else. And so I love and keep reminding myself of what the British poet and climate change activist Harry Josephine Giles has said, that the work of poets is more often like roots, worms, rainstorm, slow, persistent, and irresistible.
Yeah, that's really, really true, Eileen. And what inspired the stories that have gone into the making of this poem, this particular piece?
So for this piece, I tried to research on. First of all, I'm a research poet, so I tried to read about the stories of prominent women as well as immigrant women like myself, because poetry's potential really lies in its power to inspire and to tell a story. So I looked up the story of, as I mentioned, Congresswoman Spear, Janetta Sagan, who immigrated from Italy during after World War II, where she was in the resistance, and also former Half Moon Bay Mayor Naomi Patridge, who was relocated to a camp during World War II as a Japanese person. So those are the stories that inspire me, and the story of practically of everyone I meet. It's I think everyone has a story to tell, and they should have the freedom to tell it in the way that will mean the most to them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Eileen. And going back to the first poem that you shared, "Take Heart," and that has brevity in it, but so much wisdom in the piece. And I was thinking of this line which says, "Say you remembered to put out feeders." That is such a strong line, and I was wondering, in the past few years, since the pandemic, it seems that poetry has seen a resurgence with so many Zoom readings and virtual open mics, webinars, all devoted to poetry. As a poet laureate working through the pandemic years, did you feel that poetry struck a collective chord in a time of chaos and crisis, especially? And did it inspire you differently in your own process as a poet?
Yes, so I saw this meme going around saying, now that we are at the tail end of the pandemic, don't forget the poets whom you turned to during the pandemic. So, but to be honest, I think I read more than I wrote during these past 2 years. Most of the poems I did manage to write, which are not very many, were commissioned. I do think there is more urgency in my writing. There's a deeper and a more open-hearted awareness of myself and the spaces I share with others.
That is really interesting, Eileen. Thanks so much for sharing those intimate and inside details on your work. If we can hear a few more pieces, and then we can come back to this.
Of course. So the very first poetry event that I organized in San Mateo County as Poet Laureate was a Valentine's Day reading, which I co-hosted with former Belmont Poet Laureate Jackie Rigoni. I think it's not a coincidence that my first book is actually a collection of love poems, because holding on to love in its many forms was what saved me. And I think this ties up with our theme of poetry being a necessity. So I'd like to share a few poems from my book Traje de Boda, which was published by Meritage Press in 2010. The proposal. "Do you love me?" he asked. And how could she have said no, here where the olive trees grow? He spoke of love like sea and sky colliding, like bodies turning to water, the dust forgone. There is only water and what floats on it, love by love between Rome and Carthage, and him on it and her. Of course, it happened a long time ago. Who remembers the mass of green, what evokes in the wind? But he creates her over and over as she closes her eyes over and over to the horizons. The Book of Vows. Delicate and familiar is the secret language of hands. There is, for instance, the piña, unspoken by the weavers of Aklan, Nushu by the wives of ancient China, Chope by the grandmothers of Punjab, Nakis by the women of Anatolia. Soft, wispy, red, and endless is the sum of their symbols. The quivered touch, stitch by stitch, meant simply this: I live unimagined. Traje de boda for Sophie. I longed to be beautiful outside of you. See me live my ironies. I will drape exquisitely, therefore be still. Let us be perfect for a day, and thereafter depend on incompleteness, which begs for beginnings. I'd like to share one more love poem. I have a lot of friends who are not involved in the poetry or arts industry at all, but I think on some level, they understand that poetry has a way of accessing and illuminating our deepest feelings and most sacred memories. So I've been asked a number of times to write a poem for weddings. And I would like to share this poem I wrote for my friends Ai Hiyama and Arun Kishore. It was later published in Guest Journal. I is love, and deep as midnight, the way Arun is the caller of first light, a fiery vein into cotton ball clouds. In San Francisco, when the air is salty and fair, love is him, a bowl lute, harp-like and earnest. And it is her, dark tresses and long white dress. On the Malabar coast, love is monsoon and sun glitter. In the land where the sun rises, it is 1,000 paper cranes, squash folded and golden. Here is a wish, and the wish is love, and love is a promise, and the promise is hers. In her long white dress, she is everything, every sunrise, and 1,000 paper cranes. Thank you so much.
Oh, stunning pieces, Eileen. There is so much beauty in them, and also they're culturally rich in the way they express all these different things that come together. And since we are talking about the art form, how necessary it is, through poetry we experience life and come to knowledge of ourselves and the world we are surrounded by. How has this art form inspired you in your own experiences, especially in your journey as a poet laureate?
So poetry has always, well, I've only started becoming a poet after college. And it was, I find now that in hindsight, it's most definitely a way to link past, present, and future. And I wouldn't be here were it not for my mentors. Mentorship is how we pass down literary style and knowledge. It's how we hone our craft, which is why every chance I get, I try to honor my mentors, such as Reme Grifalda, who is founding curator of the Asian American collection at the Library of Congress, and Eileen Tabios, and the late Ed Moranan, and so many others. These mentors introduced me to post-colonial writings and a literary landscape that decenters the Western canon. Dr. Clay introduced me to the works of Bell Hooks, Margaret Walker, and many others. So I'm always mindful that what my mentors were giving me was a gift. In my journey, I've learned that mentorship is an act of generosity. It's voluntary and uncompensated, and these mentors, even up to now, they teach me more than just the craft of poetry. They have taught me how to build community. And now that I'm a mentor myself, I tell my mentees to ask me whatever they want or need to know now while I'm still here. Mentors have a wealth of knowledge that has been passed down to them, and this is what we call poetic lineage. This is what connects poets from the past to the present to the future, and it's certainly one of the most powerful resources a poet can have. I don't know if I answered your question though.
No, absolutely, Eileen. I completely understand what you're saying, and I could say the same for you, that you have been such an amazing mentor to me, whether you know this or not, I'm not sure, but all along, and it is in your words, as you said, mentorship, in that there is so much generosity, and that generosity just oozes from your work and what you have done in the community throughout your laureateship. So I'm really grateful for that, and really inspired by all your work. And I do have a couple more questions for you, but please go ahead, and if you would like to share a few more pieces.
Oh, actually, I just I think.
Do you have anything, Eileen? Anything in relation to the youth, like youth poets? Something for the youth poets?
Okay, maybe I can share with you a recent piece so I've been giving eco poetry workshops.
Yes.
And so a lot of the youth I work with haven't really done much poetry. It's not really required in schools around the county. So I try to work with them in a way that they will be interested in writing a poem. And I do whatever I can offer that will inspire them. For example, we did a workshop that incorporated lines from pop singers such as Billie Eilish. And this one is actually a very short piece. Um, um, Actually, I will share something else. Sorry. So this one is it's titled "Ideas to Postpone the End of the World," and it took lines from newspapers, articles on climate change, and incorporated the five senses. So the first line is a line from an article, and followed by a template on the five senses format. The earth is speaking. She tells us that we have no more time. It sounds like cars going by, like a cat chasing her feathered toy, a dog barking, a murder of crows cawing, a buzzing. It's time to look at the bigger picture. See the overcast sky and the still unlighted tree. Watch the bird feeder that lies a few feet from the cat perch. We cannot eat coal, we cannot drink oil, but we can feel the curved edge of the table, a pen's pointed nib, how light the empty mug. We are not drowning, we are fighting. We can smell the fresh laundry, but the apple doesn't smell like an apple at all. We have ideas to postpone the end of the world. We've swallowed the bitter fruit. So that's it. It was part of a poem that we worked on during one of the workshops.
Oh, that's really amazing, Eileen. And in your work as the Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, you have, as you said, also created new pathways for youth poets, launching youth programs and competitions and anthologies and even films. So I wanted to ask, how challenging was it to engage the youth? And what is your advice to a young poet writing in this time?
Um, so in the beginning, it was actually a couple of high school students who reached out to me after I was appointed poet laureate. At the time, my idea really was to reach out to community members, not any specific community at all. And the students interviewed me, and after that, a couple of parents reached out to me because their kids loved poetry and they wanted guidance on how to nourish this gift. um, I think it's really more about having a grasp of what anyone, not just young people, need at any given point. And sometimes it's not necessarily poetry, it's friendship or mentorship or time. And my advice to young poets, the first rule is always to pay attention. Have a journal handy to write down your thoughts and impressions. The second is widen your circle, find your tribe, learn from other writers. You have to have mentors, people who are invested in your growth. And most importantly, be yourself. Let your personality shine in your work. And everything else is about craft, which will come later. That's how it happened for me, at least.
Such important words there, Eileen. Each word is like a pearl of wisdom, as we say. So thank you for sharing that. And my final question to you is that almost everyone here in this room has been a witness to your exemplary laureateship. And not only have you been a phenomenal community poet, launching an astounding number of events and campaigns, highlighting poets from all around the Bay Area. uh, you have also been the public face of poetry, so to say, in the most inspiring way. And I wanted to ask, what made you take on this exciting yet demanding role of the poet laureate, and what would be your guiding words to a poet who aspires to be in this position one day?
Well, my path hasn't really been straight. It was 2003 when my first poem was published in print, in a print journal. Um, and um, and then my first book came out in 2010. My second book came out 8 years after that. So what I'm saying is, being a good poet laureate isn't about being prolific or having an MFA. Of course, to be a poet laureate, you have to be a good poet yourself. You have to know your craft to be able to share it. Your work has to be able to stand on its own. But as I've mentioned before, I did not train as a poet. I trained in biotech and worked in fields not necessarily related to biotech or the arts. But I did have world-class mentors, and I tried to learn as much from them as they were willing to give me. And so now I try to pay it forward. Um, what I've always been, though, is a community poet. I've always been doing something with community for the past, for more than 20 years. So to me, being a poet laureate is about meeting people where they are and just celebrating the gift of poetry and of people. And being a poet laureate takes a lot of heart and stamina. And I am just really honored and proud to be on this journey with you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Eileen. It is, I'm certainly, I mean, it is filled with gratitude that I have a poets laureate like you to around me to look up to and feel inspired from. And tonight was such a gracious offering. Do you have any other poems to share, or should we keep one towards the end of the open mic?
Yes, so
Would you like that?
yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. Everyone would agree with me that you and your poetry truly are a gift to our community. And I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor briefly for any questions or comments from the audience before we close this segment. And I encourage all of you to unmute, share your thoughts with Eileen while I share some of her links in the chat, which you can save.
Thank you very much for sharing, Eileen. That was great.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I'm just really overwhelmed. I'm seeing so many old friends and new friends. So I'm really very, very grateful.
Can I ask you the title of the poem you read about the end of the world so I could find it? And
oh, hi, Peter.
Hi.
I will thank you for your eco poems, by the way. It's called ideas to postpone the end of the world, and it came from a title. It came from an article about the last COP26 summit, and it was quoting a youth activist. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name, Sai Surui.
Maybe you could send an email or put it in the chat or something there. That'd be great. Thank you.
I have a question for Eileen. I was just interested on knowing how would you describe the importance of poetry and ecology, the environment? Why cannot they be apart from each other?
Well, because I really truly believe that everything is connected. What happens to me personally right now and what I do right now can affect someone from the other end of the world, not necessarily today, but 20 years from now. And I am also, so I started becoming more aware of this because my home country of the Philippines is one of the places most susceptible to sea level rise. And where we are right now, San Mateo County, we are ground zero for sea level rise. So, and it's not just a matter of, there's a lot of intersectionality as well. It's climate change activism is also about climate justice. It's also about housing justice, and it's also about racial justice. The poorest communities are always the hardest hit, and that is also one of the reasons why I became very focused on this in the past few years.
Thank you. Yeah, I always find, like, nature is people, and we need nature, and people in nature at some point needs us too. But I mean, just wanted to hear your thoughts. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Eileen, this is Lois Freed, and I have a question for you. Hi there. And your work and your poems tonight were absolutely beautiful, and thank you for sharing with us. I wanted to ask you a question about all of the local poets that are all around San Mateo County, and we get together as we are tonight. What are some other areas or ways that we could more engage the community?
For me, it always starts with your story. Just tell your story through a poem in whatever way that is comfortable to you, and that always draws in people. Just listening to what you have to say, that is very powerful. Giving and if you have a platform, enlarge it as much as you can, and bring everyone to the poetry table. Everyone's voice deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves to tell their story, and poetry is for everybody.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you again, Eileen. What you have offered to us has really enriched us. And like you've said, poetry is a great connector that knows no walls or bars or fetters or strangers. You too, as a poet and a poet laureate, have been such a great connector, bringing poetry into unique and diverse platforms and inspiring each of us here. I, for one, like I said, as a new poet laureate, learning the ropes of it, feel greatly inspired by your work in the field. And it has been a pleasure to curate this poetry night and host you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Monica.
With that, we are going to stop recording now. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thanks for joining in, and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.